What thoughts run through your mind when you view a landscape like this? Barren? Desolate? Rocky? To the average person, they just might agree with you. But to that tough New England farmer, why, he'd think you better check your eyesight, son. For the farmer sees vitality, richness, and profits. You see, the basic New England farmer, regardless of how dour he or she may look, is in fact God's optimist. Hi, I'm Ranger Chuck Arning with the National Park Service here in the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And that's right, God's optimist. You see, planting corn and grain and vegetables in this rocky New England soil, you got to be an optimist, because that's a real challenge. You also need traditions, traditions of hard work, patience, storytelling, and family get-togethers, and a tradition of caring for your farm animals and your farm neighbors. So join me as we hear a few good stories. We also understand the traditions that made the New England farmer God's optimist. Today we're going to explore the first part of the farm cycle, plowing and seeding the fields, getting ready. And to do that, we're going to hook up with our good friends at Waters Farm Preservation here in Sutton, Massachusetts. And true to the traditions of the New England farming community, we're going to be joined by several farmers who are actually going to demonstrate for us how they used to plow the fields in the old days, using teams of oxen and horses. You're going to hear a few good stories, filled with a lot of warmth and humor, but also a little bit of sadness. Because remember, this is real life. This is the way it happened. But finally, a word of caution. When you're out there plowing the fields, you've got to pay attention. You want to run into any of those pesky New England stones.
I would rather have been outside than inside the house. I loved to be down in the barn with the animals, cats, dogs, and calves, and things like that. But I never had to milk cows or anything like that, but I did have to ride horseback, and that was for cultivating corn. And from the time I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and there was a hired man that held the cultivator, and then I had to ride the horseback so that he wouldn't stay right in the rows anyway. Back and forth, back and forth. So to this day, I'm not too fond of horses. And I also had to ride horse when we unloaded the hay for the hay fork. And my father always put the heaviest load that a horse could hardly pull. And we had, actually, they were old army horses. They weren't quiet horses. And
as a kid, we didn't see big, nice teams around because you couldn't afford them. And now the mills would have one. Wallace Lumber had a fancy pair of horses. And I can remember in the 30s, the Perry brothers they got 2 big fancy teams. I don't know how big they were because, but those are Cadillacs. And, we ran with the Model A's and the Chevrolets, and that's basically what we had. And like she said, her dad had those army horses, culled out. Those are horses that made to pull cannons. Those are horses that made to work in the cavalry. And you got some, they jumped through a plate glass window, which I knew one horse did up in Worcester. And they, came into the T.O. Flynn stable. T.O. Flynn sold them to this peddler up there in Worcester. He went through one window and out the other, the corner of a house, corner of a business, So you ran into everything, and that's where sometimes kids got hurt. And farming, because whether you may be a good herdsman, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're a good teamster. You may not know much about a horse, and you're best to have a good, well-broke team that's quiet,
When did the farmer look at his field and decide it's getting ready to plow and then harrow?
Well, I can give you an example, because I'm 74 years old, and my uncle and my grandfather plowed the day I was born, February 5th, 1925. And he said it was just like summer, and the fields were nice and soft and dry, and both of them were plowing. So I think that tells you, I don't know, the minute you could plow, you get out there and you did it. So if you're talking about average, more like the end of April, 1st of May, and you find them out there, and then they're working pretty hard to get their plowing done. But because they like to be, at the end of May, you want to have your crops in. You want to get your corn in and whatever else, because you got to get it growing. So again, we're dealing with, way back in them days, corn, they just started developing into 90-day development stuff here probably 30, 40 years ago. And if you didn't get it in early, it didn't mature, and you just didn't get the crops out of it. But as soon as they could plow, they would. Anytime you could plow, you got onto it. And you understand when you're plowing with a team of horses, probably walking 2 miles an hour, and how far would a horse expect a good team and good condition should go about 20 miles. And so he's hooked to a plow. If it's a big, heavier horse, you have a little wider plow. And you might turn anywhere from a 6-inch furrow to an 8 to 10 or a 12. And if you got, is the bigger the horse is. So, but he should be able to work in condition 20, sometimes up to 22 miles a day. That was his day's work. And you rested him, you know, every hour you'd have to give him a break and let them catch their wind a little bit, and they go on. And so they labored along. So you can see it took a long time to plow an acre of ground. Horses plowing, you have to train them to walk slow, which you see, you'll see anybody handing a hand plow, because he's going along, the horse is going to follow the furrow, the first furrow, and then the guy on the plow handles, he's handling it very gentle. He doesn't push the plow. You'll see that in movies. Some poor sucker, he's trying to push the plow. The horses drag the plow, and all you do is tip the plow, and by tipping it, you guide the width of the furrow. And the plowman never looks back. He always looks ahead. If you don't, he'll have a zigzag pattern like you wouldn't believe.
So you're always looking ahead, you don't look back.
Never look back. You'll line up in that tree at the end of the field, or some stone, or some object, even if it's your wife out there, and you head for it. Hope they don't move. And that's what you do. You keep them right between your team of horses or a team of oxen, and that's what you shoot for. And that lays the furrow, because if you look back, you say, I should compensate, and you start doing these, and then you're in trouble the rest of the... Because the first one, if you make a little bit of a mistake, you're cutting the furrow, maybe, say, a 10-inch, 12-inch furrow, and you can compensate. If to straighten it out, maybe you want to cut 8 here, and maybe cut a little 12-inch there, and pretty soon you got a nice straight furrow, and you got a whole series of them. And that was the art of plowing properly and done with the horses. But always look ahead, never look back. I guess it goes like life is like that, you know.
Isn't that?
Many of our farms, you see, this farm here has got one big field of 13 acres, and that's large. I can remember as a child I heard about a farm, and I remember having a ride down to Whitensville to see a 100-acre field. Never heard of one in my life. 100 acres, I mean, one field. But you see, Machine Works supported that. But you take most of our fields, they would be 1 acre, 3 acres, and 8 acres was kind of quite a large field, because depending on how far they carried the stones to clear it, where they put the first wall. Plow a field about 1 acre a day. So if you had 8 acres, then you want to do the whole field, which they wouldn't do. They'd only do a part of that, probably half it. But it would be 1 day for every acre, and that's just the plow. Now you got a harrow, and you're going to probably, so I would say 2 to 3 days per acre to do it with a team.
Get ready for seed.
Yeah, to get ready for the seed bed, yeah. And then from there on, depending on what you're planting, you know. If you're planting corn, the horses go back again. If you're broadcasting, a man could probably seed, you know, with a seeder hanging from his chest. He could seed out oats and stuff in fairly quick time. I wouldn't think he'd probably spend an hour and a half on a field per acre seeding it.
How did they get rid of rocks?
Well, first off, now that brings up a subject of when you're plowing and or when you were mowing. And you had to have, these are New England horses that are broke properly, or trained. I hate the word broke. but they're trained properly, they're educated. When they touch a stone with a plow, they stop. Because if they don't, something's going to break.
My uncle came to visit. He was in the House of Representatives. It was like the city mouse coming to the country mouse. And he was a big, tall, distinguished-looking gentleman. And they used to come and visit and stay overnight. And so, of course, we didn't have any inside plumbing. We just had the privy out in the woodshed. And we always just used newspapers and catalogs for toilet paper. So anyway, when he came to visit, my mother thought, well, she would get out some dress patterns and put those out for toilet paper. So he came down in the morning and went out to the privy, and he came back in, and he was a big, tall man, and my mother was about 5'2". He came in and he put his arm around my mother and he said, Sister Grace, he said, those dress patterns were a big improvement on the newspapers, but next time, take out the pins.
Now, Bud, what is this? Do I hang my hat on it or what?
That's a harrow. Probably dates back somewhere around, I'd say 1830s in that period. Like I used to say, Grandpa, how old is that piece of equipment? He don't know, my father had it, you know, before me. So you figure Grandpa's old great-grandfather was born in 1830s, and so somewhere around that period. This was a pre-runner to what we have today, a disc harrow, when they got the round discs to cut. But they would take this unit here. Of course, this was pulled mostly by oxen, and you know, that period, because oxen were the big engines of power on the farm till after the Civil War, you know. It was quite a chore to get the sod broke up, but they do their plowing, and they take this unit here, and this would chop up the sod for them. And then there was another stage they went after that to prepare the seed bed. So, Bobby, open this thing up, because they made this for good storage. You can see it's not very wide, and but when they get to use it, they would open the thing up.
Now, Bud, how do they sharpen those tongs?
Just dragging through the dirt. The dirt keeps them polished, keeps it fairly good. Because this, and you'd stand on it to increase the weight. And as this went through the sod, you see it's like a slight plow. And the thing you had to watch with this, you see, you got all these cutters, and they're actually creating a mound of furrow, and so then we'd have to cross over, because you could end up with lumps in the field if you went back in the same direction. Next thing you'd have one big hump. So you would take and cut, go down through your field, cut, and then do a half and do a half and do a half. As I say, if you wanted to increase the cutting power, you would stand on it. Also, it would save you a little labor of your own. And drop that thing down, Bob, and they can see how the wing nut. Of course, this is where you hooked your chain whiffletree on. Usually with oxen, you'd had a working chain there, and that's the wing nut right there. And show them how that comes off, Bob.
You can stand on it.
You can stand. Oh yeah.
Drive the team from back.
With an experienced team, you'd get a good ride. You'd be all right. If you had a crazy team,
you get a good ride too.
You get a good ride too. But usually, after they've been around the field a few times with one of these things, I mean, the soft ground takes the steam out of anything. And when it's working, it's cutting, and you can see how these cutters would turn kind of a furrow or a mound on the inside. So the next time around, after you started cutting, you would level it off. You might even cross-quarter it. The same thing they have in a spike tooth harrow. We have a spike tooth harrow somewhere, because these were gifts by people that came to the farm and knew we were setting up a living history place. And a spike tooth the beams are bigger, they're much thicker, and of course they're all hand-wrought spikes, and they're probably 6-8 inches long, and they drove them through the beam. This was probably, something like this would be out in about I'd say 1870s, 1880s, this would come along. And this was like a comb. And if you stand it up, Bob, so you can show the bottom. So after you get through chopping it up with the cutters, then you would drag this through, and you can see these are the spikes, and they kind of rake out the clods of dirt, and you're preparing a seed bed because you don't want the weeds, and the more you break it up, the better the weeds will die.
One of the things about farming years ago, when you drove down a road like coming into here, there were no trees or brush along the walls. The farmer maintained his walls so that his cattle or whatever would stay in and his neighbor's cattle would stay out.
So, Bud, here's a pretty typical New England stone wall, isn't it?
Yep, it sure is. This is a work of art and labor, laying them up. And of course, it was the clearing of the fields was the main thing, because every time you took a stone out, you could grow some crops, grow grass for the animals, grow vegetables for the family. And you can see somebody like Bob, right by Bob's leg, there's a stone, and I'd have to guess it. I don't know how deep it is, but I'm going to say it weighs 800 pounds in that class. And when they found those stones, they had to dig around them, and then they'd roll them out of a kind of angle of dirt, and they'd roll them out of the hole, and they'd put them on a stone boat, which was a drag, and then they'd bring them over to where they're going to start laying their walls. And nature keeps pushing them up. Every year you'll find another stone on top of the ground, and they say they built these walls, and of course the walls serve to keep the animals out, but also you had a lot of fields. That'd be an acre field, 2 acres, 3 acres, 4. Like I said, we had one field at the farm was 8, and that was pretty huge, and I mean for its time. And these walls are all over this farm down in the woods, and people will say, now why did they put a wall in the woods? Because the ground was used, it was pastured, you put animals down there, and so every bit of ground they had to use. Big families, they need to feed them. That was part of our New England culture.
Now, when you talk about a drag, a stone boat, it
Yeah.
really is kind of like a big sled, wasn't it?
A bunch of planks, you put in, it could be up to 3 feet wide and 6, 8 feet long, usually around 6 feet long, and it'd be 2-inch planks. Sometimes in the early ones, they would try to bevel them and get an angle up so when they dragged, they didn't drag into the ground. And then later on, they started making some cast iron heads. We have a head down here at the barn we could show you.
Who was most likely to be picking up these stones and roll them into the back of the boat?
The whole family. That's where, if you could get Ma out of the kitchen, my aunt wouldn't come out of the kitchen. She said, I will never learn to milk a cow. If I milk one once, I'll have to milk them the rest of my life. I got enough to do. So she took care of feeding all the family and the hired men and all the rest. But when it came to picking up the fields, they'd get the kids if they were 6, 7-year-old, because they can pick up what a kid 6 or 7 can pick up. And if they're bigger, they'll roll bigger stones on. And so they would load the stone boat, and usually you might have a good old horse or an ox on there that was pretty quiet, and the kids could work them, you know. So Pop could be doing something else and preparing something other part of the field, and the kids could be cleaning up the stones.
We'll let these youngsters wander off, and they came across a cedar, trying to figure out how it fits together. So come on over here. Let's see what's going on here for a second. Bud.
Yes, sir.
Looks like a cedar of some sort. How does it work? Is that what we're trying to find out?
Well, I'll tell you a little history on this cedar. This thing was given to us by the Whiten family from down Upton, and Bill Whiten said, I got something for you. He's always coming up with something here. Period of 1850, and this was the way you put your seed. You had 2 different seed boxes, and you can see inside the seed box, these are where the seed pockets went down, and you'd load this up, and they said it was used for a lot for seeding pastures or whatever you wanted. So a man picked it up, and then this here is I call them picker sticks or shuttle sticks. And you see that as these went across, you'd put a pin in here. These are numbered like 1 to 10, and you could tell how much, small seed, you'd put it so it would be hardly any movement. And the larger seed, if you want to shake it, well, you could change your pin, and that changed the fulcrum.
Well, that's the same technology we use today with the lawn seeders, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, there's a number down here, and you just...
Yep. Absolutely. And you can see the metal leaders on the spokes here, so it didn't chew the spokes off. So that was the scuff plate.
This is nice. So you just like that, and you just walk along, and where you go.
Yeah. So you'd have to have a pin in here.
Okay. Yeah.
See, and then that makes this shuttle block work back and forth. And there's one on this side too, you know, so you can. That's how that shuttle block. And this one here. See, yeah. And then this helped feed the cedar. So you go right in there, put a pin in there. Put mostly all together, but it's a pretty unique thing.
I remember I had scarlet fever when I was about 8 years old, and of course the whole house was quarantined. My brother was home from college. He couldn't go back to school, and then they couldn't sell the milk. They had to throw all the milk away. And I remember after I got a little better, I was, I think about 8 weeks before I could really do much of anything. My mother had to stay right in the room with me most all the time. And she wasn't really allowed to get out and mix. They used to bring food up for the two of us. And I remember after I got better, we had like a tin roof over the porch. And they used to put me out there to have sunbaths. And so I was trying to do things to entertain myself, and my mother gave me a mirror and comb and everything like that. So my brother, the one that was home from college, was spreading manure. And so when he would be coming up through the yard with a horse and wagon, I would take the mirror and shine the sun in his eyes so he couldn't see. And he would stand there with his fist, "You wait till I can get a hold of you." So, but I don't think he ever did much damage. But
The coming of the ox and the horse dramatically changed the New England landscape. These two great, powerful animals allowed the farmer to be far more productive. But there's a catch here. Getting two animals to work together, a pair of oxen, a pair of horses, that's indeed a challenge, because they don't always want to do what you want them to do. And for the farmer, that was indeed a challenge. But here in Sutton, Massachusetts, home of Ox University, they had a way to deal with that.
Well, the Smithsonian magazine had quite an article, of course, it was on oxen, and they spoke of the Ox University of Sutton, Mass, and here we are today because this is where it was. And I know this through my grandfather. My grandfather Marble used to tell me about Deacon John Marble, who was the professor of the oxen, and he was a great man in training. In fact, I just saw this morning a little note I'd taken some years ago in a talk with Gramp, and he said he was all bent over because, see, when you drive an oxen, you got your whip and your lash, and you kind of lean over because you're working from the nice side. And he said he just stayed that way. He just never straightened up. And so Gramp's first stories about Deacon John Marble and his oxen, he'd say he had a horse, and that horse's name was Abel. And Deacon John was quite a religious man, so I think there's maybe some connection to the horse's name. But the horse was an Abel horse. He was a voice command animal. He would work without reins on him, and he was always hitched to the lead. And Gramp told me they'd start out of this farm for Sutton Center, which is roughly a mile or so, and they'd make the turn, and there might be as many as 6 oxen, 6 yoke at a time. They'd all be tied, and they'd start with the bigger ones up front and the small calves down the back, and with the horse Abel leading the way, and he knew how to go to Sutton Center around the church common and back again. That was enough exercise for the period, and that gave Deacon John his time to touch up the teams that need talking to, and somebody just take the guide with a switch and just touch him up and get him to step up in the line. And they got used to his voices, and he worked back and forth on those animals, and while the horse Abel just kept on going. He went up to town, around the church common, and he said they would be back to the farm. So I would imagine that one of those school periods, if you took a man by himself and he's got to yoke up 6 oxen, and then he's got to hook them together, and he got to get that's got to be some fantastic horse. And it probably takes him an hour and a half or so just to get ready for the ride and to go up the road. And then It would be about probably an hour up and an hour back, and I'd say he's probably put in a good half a day. And this is how he did it. And he was quite a good gentleman with his animals, because he died around 1905, so I'll give you probably born in 1832. When he broke a team, and I don't like to where I go using that term, I dislike it, and when he trained the team, he trained them well. They were trained with kindness and firmness, and it takes just like you do a child. And because when a farmer bought a team of oxen, he wanted something that was safe, even his wife could drive, because it's family business. And a little child might end up driving it, you know, and that's the way it worked. Is you had a team that was safe enough, you put the kids, whoever it was, to make it go, and so John was well known for that.
Back!
I don't know, it was just a way of life, and you just didn't give it much thought, so.
I had an uncle who was like a father. I had a good father, but he was not interested in agriculture. And Uncle Charlie was, and he had no boys. He had 3 daughters. And like the old farmer said, he got dotted out, you know. And so I was a favorite kid. I gave a sermon one time, a layman's sermon, and I was talking about him because he impressed me so much. And back in, I probably was 10 years old, 11 years old, and I was sleeping. It was 2 in the morning, and he grabbed me by the toe, and he shook me, and he said, "Hey, want to take a ride?" And I said, "Yeah, of course, I'm always willing to go." He had an old 31 Chevy, you know, and chugged and grunted along. And we went over to Oxford to a little hill farm, and there was a Polish lady over there, and we got over there about 3 in the morning. She had a sick cow. And so he doctored up the cow, and he got the cow on its feet, and things were going good. And she was a widow lady. She had 3 or 4 kids, and broke, working her heart out to make a family. And in those days, he'd charge $2, you know, for a visit. And the vet would get 5 to 7, so you didn't holler. I mean, when it's going to die, you call the real vet, you know, but that's when they would go that far, if they did. But Charlie he was a good guy. He was very talented. And so the woman says, I can see her today, Mr. Charlie no got a money, no got a money. So, you know, she said, my husband, he's dead, and I try to raise the kids, and I try to run the farm. And he said, that's quite all right. He said, you don't have to pay me nothing. And he said, if this cow gets a little sick again, just call me, I'll come right back. That's the kind of guy he was. That was life with Charlie Putnam, you know. There you go.
There you go. That rock-solid New England farming tradition of extending a helping hand when it's most needed. Well, this has been Ranger Chuck Arning with the National Park Service here in the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. Without our friends here at Waters Farm and the surrounding farming community, we'd have to use our imagination to recreate the 1800s and what farming life was really like. And I get a whole new appreciation after watching those horses and oxen plow the fields, just how difficult yet rewarding a life on the farm was. Now, this is the first of a 2-part series of New England farming traditions. After all, we got those fields plowed and seeded, just can't wait for the hay to come up and then to mow it and harvest it. As a matter of fact, if you don't mind sticking around, we could use some able-bodied men and women to help us with those tasks and chores. So until next time, we hope to see you in the Blackstone Valley.
There's a song that will linger forever in our ears. Sing hard times come again no more. There's a song, the cry of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Sing hard times come again no more. There's a song, the cry of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Sing hard times come again